everyone. We're excited to have you here today. We're going to give everyone just a moment to get in as it takes a little bit of time, but we're really excited to talk to you today about student AI literacy. It's something that we care a lot about here at AI for Education, and I'm really excited to have Corey, our Chief Program Officer. This is our first webinar together, which is amazing. Really excited to have you all here. As you know, if you've joined us before, we'd love it for you to get involved, share resources, and also drop in, as we already started to do, into the chat where you're from, what you do. And we're actually going to launch a poll in just a moment about a couple questions that we have for all of you. And I think that we have just about everybody here that's ready to go. So we're going to launch a poll right now. We'd love to know more about you. So what do you do? But then we have two questions to get us started around how many kids do you think are actually using generative AI already, as well as how do you think students are using AI? So if you don't mind taking a little bit of time to answer these questions, we'd really appreciate that as we get started. And we're really excited to have you all today. I'm Amanda. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AI for Education, former teacher, someone that we have is someone that has always advocated for student voice. It's something that we have had as a part of our business the entire time. And we're really going to be focusing today on building student AI literacy. And so I'm really excited to have Corey here with me. And if you didn't hear before, this is our first webinar together. And so really excited to have you here and love you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Amanda. I can't believe that this is our first webinar together. I'm excited to be here too. Hi, everybody. I'm Corey. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at AI for Education, like Amanda said. I am a former high school English teacher myself. I actually, though, got my degree in elementary education, became a high school English teacher, and then I was also a founding school leader for a 6 through 12 school. And then after my school leadership days, I have spent time in ed tech and in school design and really supporting innovation and supporting the integration of technology and emerging technologies into school models for the purpose of effective teaching and learning. So I'm excited to talk about this topic together today.
Absolutely. And so what we're going to do is, if you could just take, almost everyone has answered the poll, so we'll give just another minute for doing that. And so the ultimate goal of today is we're going to be looking at what's happening in our schools and systems already, how we can start to think about what AI literacy is and can be, and then some strategies for you to start building that within your practice. And so I'm going to stop the poll now. If you didn't have a chance to respond, that's okay. You can just drop that in. Everyone's doing it. Like, there we go. Everyone's getting that last minute in, which is great. So I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results with everybody. And so we have, love to see about 40% of people here are in K-12, but we've got higher ed. And then we also have some of our nonprofit and ed tech friends. And I always love our others. We're gonna definitely have to figure out what the others mean and start adding that. And then we asked the question of what percentage of students do you think use AI? And it looks like the majority of you are somewhere between the more than 10%. It is interesting to see people that believe that more than 3/4 of students are using these tools. And then also, I love this. And so we asked a lot of questions, and we did ask that kind of that one that's really big in people's mind, which is the idea of cheating. We've got studying, homework actually being the number one that you all think, cheating on projects, but then also creative, entertainment, social, emotional, and entrepreneurial. So this is really great to see what we're thinking about. So if we're going to move to the next slide, let's actually talk about what's happening. There's been more and more in terms of what we know about students' use of AI. And so this is from December 2023. There's been newer research that shows a very similar amount of students, but about half of students K-12 this is more focused on high school, have said that they have used generative AI tools. And this is going to be mirrored with in the UK, where 79% of 7 to 17-year-olds said they used some sort of generative AI last year. So we are seeing somewhere probably between a half and 3/4 of students are using generative AI. We know this number goes up in higher education. We know that students in higher education are using this more, but we're also going to look at the fact that they're using tools that go beyond just ChatGPT. And so if we go to the second case, we also know that they're using it really often. And so this is something that is now pretty sticky with students. We see them using it. This is from the RAND did a follow-up survey. This is from February of this year, where students were saying that they're using these tools at least weekly. And what you'll notice again is that they're going to be K-12, but higher, the undergrads themselves are using it the most. And so what we have here is absolutely an opportunity to really start to think about this is already here. It's happening. Our students are experiencing generative AI tools, often the case without any support or training. So they're using these tools just as they come out of the package, or a kid sent them a TikTok or, a WhatsApp message about how to use a tool to do something. And so they're using these tools pretty often and without any true support. So if we go to the next slide, this is actually really interesting to see how they're using the tools. And so what you'll notice, again, this is K-12 and undergrad. So help writing essays and other writing site assessments, studying for tests and quizzes. You can see how much that goes up in our higher ed students, completing other types of schoolwork, deepening subject knowledge. And you see, I think it's really interesting for that undergrad because there's so much deeper content that it makes sense as a partner for learning. And then creating presentations. We know that teachers also struggle with creating presentations. So it's interesting to see that students are also using these tools. And so you can see that they're using this all across everything from what we think of, which is writing an essay, all the way through deepening their content knowledge and even presenting their work. So if we go to the next slide, what's really interesting though, is that while we're talking about students, one of the reasons why we believe that AI literacy for students is so important is that we're already in that moment. I don't know if everyone remembers when we started putting Microsoft Office on our resume. I don't know if you can remember, Corey, but you said, I'm really good at Excel. I even remember when I put Google Suite with Gmail, it was cool to have Gmail. That's how old I am. But the reason why we're already at that moment, but for generative AI. So this is a Cengage report that was done this year that said that more than half of employers are already looking for hiring people that have basic AI literacy skills. They're even more willing to actually interview someone with AI literacy skills on their resume than someone that does not have it, which is really a remarkable turnaround so quickly. Also, we see a very strong signal of recent graduates believing that AI literacy should have been part of their learning in college. But what we see at the bottom is for our higher ed folks here is that 55% of those students were discouraged from using generative AI. So there's a really significant disconnect happening between the ways we're supporting students to be prepared for the future that is fast and coming right now with these AI literacy skills, and this real need and tension where more and more hiring is going to be done based on people being augmented, words are hard today, are being augmented by generative AI to be able to do more for their employers. So we're going to switch to the next slide, and then it's going to hand it over to what this could mean though. We hear a lot of people talking about the impact of generative AI on potential jobs. We wanted to focus on the positive here. We do know that there will be a significant amount of jobs that are eliminated and are changed over the next decade based on generative AI. And we already are seeing some major disruption happening. Freelance jobs are down pretty significantly across the board. And we are starting to see impact in things like customer service that are happening today. But on the other side, there's some new jobs that are becoming more and more common that are considered to be STEM, but actually are not as deeply technical as they have been in the past. So things like AI and machine learning specialist is really technical. Things like a data curator or trainer, where you're actually helping train models, is something that is about how good you are at evaluating content and how good you are at reading and understanding what people will respond to and what's correct. Prompt engineering is natural language. You've got ethics that's becoming more and more popular. Systems administrators, where you actually help run and support AI systems across your business. All of these things are becoming more possible. So there's both a risk and an opportunity here, but we really want to focus today about how are we really going to set up students for the future by building that foundational AI literacy. So Corey, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. So if you didn't notice already, the case that Amanda just shared with us about why AI literacy matters is because we deeply, deeply believe that students need the skill set in order to have access and be successful in the future. I know we use the language future ready, and sometimes that can feel a little cliche, but it really is about preparing them not just for a successful career and workforce, but really for living in the future world and the modern world. It also, AI literacy helps foster those critical thinking skills as AI becomes more and more prevalent in media and the world around us. So I know that sometimes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what AI literacy means and how to build it, but we might be thinking directly to, oh, my students need to be using AI tools. That's not what we're saying, and we'll talk more about that later, but we do need to be aware that part of this is about knowing what AI can produce and how we need to be critical in what we're consuming, both digitally in products, but as well as in our community and society. And part of that is promoting responsible and ethical use that is grounded in values to help our students navigate what that future world is going to look like. So what? Oh, before we talk about what AI literacy is, building on that, like another common narrative that we hear when we're working with teachers and leaders and educators like yourselves is that our immediate concern, and as a former English teacher, I understand how this comes up, is that AI is just about cheating, and this is an academic integrity concern. And our conversations, therefore, with students have to be about why it's important to not cheat and not to replace your own thinking with AI generated content. Now, we're not saying don't have that conversation at all by any means, but what we are saying is that AI in schools and building AI literacy is about so much more than the academic integrity component of it. And it's about both positive use cases and opportunities to augment and prepare our students for the future, like we were just saying. But we also recognize that there are a lot of risks and limitations for our students that we need to balance as we're building the skill set for ourselves, but then for our students as well. And Amanda, definitely jump in if there's
Yeah,
I
I
know
think
you love the
I
iceberg,
do.
so if there's
So
something
if you,
here.
I mean, if you know me, which some of you may, is I do love a metaphor. And this was something that came up actually when we built this slide and representation after thinking about media literacy. Like, how does AI literacy support and or extend media literacy? And one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this up is that it is something that if you look at the way we talk about this, and even what's going around right now, you may have seen that a student's family in Massachusetts is suing the school district because their student was failed using AI for an assessment, is that it's so easy to kind of take up all the air in the room. You know, that, and we do know it's a risk, whether that's kids being accused of cheating with AI detectors that are not reliable and it not being true, or students failing or along those lines. And we do believe that is really, really important. But the opportunity to teach about media literacy and digital literacy at the same time you talk about AI literacy means that if we take a step back and actually look at the larger view, things that we've been trying to teach students forever is being critical consumers of technology and critical users, to not trust things blindly, to know when and not to use different tools. Like, all of that's been important for as long as we've had technology. So this is an opportunity to really dig into this. And one of the things we've been saying a lot is that, like, digital native does not mean digitally literate. Kids fall for scams more than their elderly counterparts. Like, that's just what happens. AI native does not mean AI literate. These have to be intentional, deliberate actions that we take to build those. And as Kate said in the chat, like, yeah, we need to actually, actually increases the importance of having these digital literacies. And something like this, what we hope happens is starts to signal wait a second, there are so many different ways in which we can start navigating this, whether it's from students knowing when and how to use it, or knowing when it can cause harm. And I think that
Mhm.
that's really what we want to do. And with this kind of approach today is like having you broaden your mindset so you can have these deeper conversations that are more and more necessary.
Yeah, and it's something that I think about, and I will have to think about who brought this up first. But this idea of literate or native doesn't mean literate. We young people today are born and grow up riding in cars. Cars are around. It's not something that's invented in their lifetime, but also just because they know about cars and they've been in cars, we would never hand a teenager over the keys to a car and say, go for it. You've known about cars and you've been around in them your entire life. No, we have to teach them the skills to be responsible and safe. We model that for them, and then we trust them to be able to be responsible and safe based on what they've learned.
Absolutely. I'm sure my parents wish I was better at driving when I started. I'm just gonna call that out. I was a terrible driver for until I was like 18. So I'm sure my parents were like, maybe it would have been better if she had known more about cars before we put her in one. Um,
We all made some mistakes. My dad had to pay for some fender bender repairs in my high school years. So we make mistakes. I mean, the metaphor still applies though. We make mistakes, but we have initial guardrails and understanding of what safe looks like so that we're not going into it blindly.
Absolutely.
So
So
what is AI literacy? Part of what we want to do today is get more concrete and specific about what this means and what it looks like. We have this definition from our friends at Digital Promise, and they have been doing a lot of really helpful work of putting out what AI literacy means and a framework around it as well. The way that we think about it is really the knowledge, the skills, the dispositions, and understanding that helps students use AI systems and AI tools, but also live within a world, both a digital world and an actual world, where they can evaluate and understand what those systems are producing.
absolutely. And maybe just go back because we also have
Sure.
our own definition too. So I'm actually going to ask Mandy to drop in our definition as well, because I think we take a slightly different view than Digital Promise in the sense of we really we focus a lot on dispositions and mindsets. And so for us, like we really dive into like what it means to know how to use these tools and like that these are going to be things that change the way we interact with technology at a fundamental level. And this is why
Mhm.
when we work with schools and districts, we talk about guidance over policy work to start out with, because guidance is about mindsets and policy is about compliance. And so we believe very strongly in this. So if we look at that next slide,
Mhm.
part of that, there we go. This is our definition of that consists of those knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And we talk about three things: safely, ethically, and effectively, which we'll talk about in a moment. But when we look at like there are two steps to this. So Corey, do you want to kind of talk about step one?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something that I'm sure some of you have heard us or seen us do. It's about building the foundational knowledge of what the technology is and what it isn't. So that is defining what is artificial intelligence, the broader umbrella of it, and what is generative artificial intelligence and why is it different? And part of that why it is different in from other AI technologies is the role of the training data and how training data impacts the technology's tendencies towards bias, hallucinations, knowledge cutoffs, etc. And that understanding, even if it's high level and basic, we still think it's important to understand what it is, how it's developed, so that we can better understand the capabilities and the limitations of the technology when we're engaging with it. That's the foundation. And then we build upon that foundation to develop, to see we like to say, AI in a way that allows you to use it safely, effectively, and ethically. Amanda, do you want to share a little bit more about our C framework?
Absolutely. And so I think that Robert just said knowledge and competency are important building blocks, but then it has to be applied. So,
Mhm.
Robert, you were absolutely on the same page with us. So, the C framework is something that we think about a lot because what we have found is that we tend to see like literacy framework that focus on one or two of these, but not all three. And so we actually put safely first because this is something that is really, really important. When Corey said the importance of training data, like AI systems, their fuel is your data. Like that, the axiom of if it's free, you're the product. So when you're using Notebook LM to create a podcast, if you're using ChatGPT and you're giving all sorts of data about your students or yourself, you're actually feeding that system in terms of like the ways in which it's going to be trained and also the ways in which it's going to like potentially train other systems. And so the idea of data privacy and security being so important right now is really unprecedented. I was at a training recently where a counselor was so excited about the thought of being able to create really, really high quality reference letters that she uploaded an entire student's resume with all of their information, their name, their location, everything about that student. And I went over and she's like, this was great. And I was like, did you use the student's real information? Like, and she said, yes. And it wasn't like she had intended. This is a thing. This is not intentional. She wasn't trying to be, to share the student's knowledge, but it was so unique of an opportunity to do this work at a more productive, faster, but also potentially a better way of actually making it more supportive of that specific student that she gave up a lot of that student data privacy. And in fact, could have been out of compliance with state and federal rules
Mhm.
around student privacy. So
Mhm.
we have to think about that safety the same way that our students are potentially giving up a lot of their information. If you've used Notebook LM, which is like we can drop the video of what we did, you can create a podcast about things like your life. And one of the Google says, okay, put in your journals. Well, if you put in your journals, you're giving up so much personally identifiable information about you that's connected to you into a system that is going to be using that to train. So something to consider about the idea of safety. You need to also identify which tools you're using. There are so many fake chat GPTs out there. In fact, when we do trainings and someone goes to their phone, and they look for chat GPT. If you want to try this out right now, go to your app store on Google or your Android or on your iPhone and just type chat GPT. And what I want you to look at is how many fake chat GPTs there are there. And some of them ask you to pay, but some of them are using that for phishing, meaning that they're taking information and there's potentially an opportunity to actually take your information. So the idea of even knowing what is real and what to use is important. And then the
Mhm.
last thing is going to be this idea of how do we start thinking about the safety, especially for students around the relationships that they're creating with chatbots. The third most popular chatbot is actually not Claude after Gemini and ChatGPT. It's going to be Character AI, which is 18 million avatars that you can talk to. We've got, if you look up, again, if you're working with students of high school age or in college, look up AI girlfriends, look up AI boyfriends. And so the idea of being able to find that division between like safely having relationships with humans and then knowing that these on the other side, this is a technology that's been designed to be persuasive. It's designed to tell you what you want to hear, and it is not going to be thinking or it's going to not have those reasoning skills. So that idea of using them safely that even goes down to that level is going to be really important. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah.
And that piece, if I can add, is even on top of when I think about the conversation of what's coming more to light about the impact of products and tools and smartphones, etc., on the mental health of young people and isolation. And part of this is building student understanding that we want them to be critical consumers of the technologies, yes, in their educational and professional careers, but also just for themselves as whole people and their wellness, and really thinking about what serves them as humans and human connection, both in school and outside of school and in their social relationships as well. So this is about, yes, in the classroom, but also certainly to the iceberg. It's much broader than that.
Absolutely. And I think it's also just a cool space to get into with students about or and around like how they're using and how they're thinking about it, because you can learn so much too about why students are going to bots for AI girlfriends and boyfriends. Why are we know that there is a like a social loneliness epidemic that's happening in our young people, especially after COVID. And so there are really strong reasons. And there's some research that shows that like balanced use can be supportive, but it's something that should be intentional in a discussion that's had.
Yeah.
The second thing is effectively, and we see this all the time. You know what? The biggest thing that we see when we do our trainings is showing people, like not just giving people the information, but actually having them first learn about AI and then learn with AI. But even more than that, learn with AI in a meaningful, effective way will change. It is radical what you will see in terms of people's really deep knowledge. Like, so students like hearing about generative AI is going to be very different than having it being modeled or actually having them, if it's age appropriate, using the tools. And that is, you know, when you are typing into ChatGPT, you are coding with natural language. I've been joking lately, we're going to get everybody in our training a junior software engineer badge, because you are like the new language of coding is English and or other languages. So this idea of understanding that the way we ask questions, the way we give feedback, the way we structure our conversations with a chatbot has an enormous impact on the value and the reliability of the output. So seeing that is really important. You also need to always understand that like you have to evaluate the AI outputs. And in fact, we were in a district just this week, and there was a student advisory panel where the kids brought up multiple times that they knew that the AI was wrong and would be wrong, but they didn't know how to evaluate it because they didn't have enough expertise. So the idea actually that they're recognizing that there will be outputs that are incorrect or hallucinations, but they needed the tools to understand how to avoid that or how to double check their work. The third piece is knowing when and when not to use. Sometimes it's better to like pull it off, like start somewhere and then pull it off, or come in fully prepared, or, you know, and then start using these chatbots. That it's not a, and it's different for each person. I know that Corey and I use generative AI differently. I know that
Mhm.
Mandy and our team uses it differently than we both do. Like, it
Mhm.
really is about our specific need, this idea of IEPs for everyone, like matching what the individual needs with these tools is going to be more and more important. And the last thing is like, just where is the most worth here, especially at this early stage?
Mhm.
There is this idea of either the jagged frontier or discoverability of these tools. It is new, it is weird, and so it doesn't always work as expected. And so you actually have to use the tools to figure out what it's actually good at and what it isn't, so that you know to go back to and start using those tools in that way. And then maybe in 6 months you try again that thing you always wanted to do, and probably the technology will have caught up to your needs by then. So Corey, do you want
Yes.
to talk a little bit about effectively?
Yes, absolutely. You're making me think of one of the trainings we've done in the past couple of months when I was working with a group of district leaders, and the communications department was what they were trying to do with their prompting was to essentially rewrite a marketing strategy for a specific campaign, but they had already, and it was a test case, but they had already come up with most of the campaign. And so they said to me, well, this is just taking more time because because we already did it, and I'm like learning how to prompt the AI to get what I want, but why would I do that if I've already done all of this thinking? And I said, I have the same question for you. So that is just an example of thinking about effectively knowing when to use the tools. And part of identifying best use cases is thinking about your expertise and what you've already done. And so I did with them was say, okay, you've already done all of this work. What are the things that you want to improve upon or expound upon, or that you feel like you could really benefit from a different perspective or a different point of view? So I was giving them some ways, other ways to think about building on their expertise and the work that they had already done. So just doing that is part of effective use, knowing what you need as an individual. Should we go on to ethically?
Absolutely. And so ethically, I think is where we all start with, right? Which is funny that we end with it because we believe it's everything. It actually could be a part of all of this. But to talk about it just
Mm,
specifically is that, first of all, is just an awareness of this goes way beyond just academic integrity. We absolutely need to teach students how to use this in a academically honest way and an ethical way. That is undeniable, but they also need to understand what they're using it for and how. And so, like, and then what the impact could be on others. And so, the first thing that we talk about all the time in that ethical use is just being transparent. Ask permission, share what you've done, even share the prompts. Like get into a place where your students, especially those that are age appropriate, feel confident asking you if they can use AI without feeling like you're going to be mad at them or think that they're cheating or that they're lazy. Like actually that this is something where at least the conversation, and that doesn't mean we say yes. It just means that the conversation is open so that students are not hiding their use and or avoiding it completely, especially if they're thinking about moving into college and career. The
mhm.
third is the idea of a do no harm mindset. And I want to bring up deep fakes here because a deep fake where we use technology to take a human and put them in another situation, have them say something they didn't say, etc., is something that's been around for as long as there's been this recent technology. So but the idea though is that it's becoming more and more sophisticated, where deep fakes are almost indistinguishable from the person. And so when we talk about that, though, some of them are pretty funny. Like the Pope wearing the puffy coat last year was kind of funny. But the thing is, though, is that students might think it's funny to like create a fun image of their friend or their teacher wearing a t-shirt. And that seems like it's okay, but without permission from that person, what could happen is if like that picture of the t-shirt and on the teacher could be shared with a parent who thinks, wait a second, that's not very professional for them to be wearing at school. And all of a sudden, something that seems very fun and even potentially affectionate can become something damaging. That's on the lower end of what deepfakes can do. But on the other end, we have seen so many instances of young girls and young boys having their images be turned into nudes and deepfake nudes. And so underage kids are being done this way. We have the example in Westfield, New Jersey. There was an example in Spain. There
Mhm.
was an example in South Korea. But more recently, we were working with a set of schools in Latin America. And one of the heads of school's daughter was part of a group chat that went on for 2 months, everybody, 2 full months, where they were sharing deepfake nudes and deepfakes of young girls, and no one felt like they could talk about it. And finally, when the head of school, the father saw it, they stopped it and had conversations. But what was crazy about it is that his daughter was one of the kids that was actually impacted. And when he asked her, why didn't you say anything? She said, it's not a big deal. We didn't know, we didn't want to make a big deal of it. And yet this is something that was pretty damaging and was something that went on for months without anyone doing it. So the idea that do no harm piece is going to be really important. And then that last piece is just a critical evaluation of outputs, that they are not biased, that they are not going to replicate like misinformation or disinformation. Like that's going to be very, very important as we go forward.
I
So yeah, go ahead.
I also appreciate, I just want to name Ralph, what you just surfaced in the chat as well, that part of the ethical conversation and part of understanding what generative AI is understanding the environmental impacts when we are using it and what that may mean for how we use it, what we expect of the organizations and companies that are building the technology, and how we think about making sure that we are getting the benefits of the technology and growing as a society, but we're still doing so and thinking about how to do it in a sustainable way. So,
Absolutely.
similar to a lot of other advancements that we're living with.
Mandy, can you drop in the climate guide actually? So we
Yes.
have a climate guide for classroom discussions on this, on the environmental impact. So we can drop that in. So
Mhm.
this is our C framework, and we will be
Right.
sharing more about this with you all. We're actually building a set of resources around this. We're just getting started with this. And so give us your feedback and then also look out for more resources. But now we're going to kind of go over to we know that the conversation situates on cheating. So how do we go beyond that? So Corey?
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. I'm sitting here thinking about, and you'll have to humor my optimistic view of the world and optimism for the future. But when I think about setting students up with foundational AI literacy skills, I really think about all of those pieces, but the ethical piece of it and how that gives me a lot more hope and honestly, like, kind of calms some fears I might have about what the future could look like, because the ethics, when we take the conversation beyond cheating and really talk about ethical use and safe use and effective use, then what we're doing is setting our future leaders up with the skill set and the mindsets to, make sure that we can see the positive benefits of the technology in the future versus much of the risks or the fears about what might happen. But the how do we get beyond cheating, or why does it make sense to get beyond this academic integrity conversation? Well, I know that especially if you're a current classroom teacher, you were a classroom teacher, maybe you are grappling with this right now. But making the conversation about AI just when was it okay to use versus not okay to use, did you use it inappropriately, etc., automatically creates one, it puts a strain on the relationship between teachers and students, and it also automatically makes the use of AI, as a high school student described it to me, this idea of a forbidden fruit. Literally, that was the language that an 11th grader used when she was talking to me about it last year. And so when we're thinking about it like that, and students are thinking about it like that, there isn't open conversation. There isn't clarity for students about how they could be using it to support their own learning and their own deepening of subject matter knowledge. It's exhausting for teachers to feel like you constantly have to be wondering if students are submitting AI generated work. And it just makes it something where it's negative, and it doesn't open up the possibility for really exploring and learning together in classrooms. So that's why we encourage, as part of building AI literacy, that we really get beyond this conversation that is just cheating.
Yeah, and can I just say this idea of reframing is that so many kids we've talked to said the first time I used I actually used it unethically without realizing it. Like I didn't know what the capabilities were.
Hmm.
I went in and then
Hmm.
I was like, okay, help me do this. And then it did it for me. And then after I was like, oh, wait a second, that's actually not okay. I shouldn't have had it do it for me. That they didn't intentionally try to cognitive offload everything, but because the technology is so capable, I mean, we have that graphing calculator for the humanities now, that magic button, that it is so different and it is so bigger and more beyond in terms of writing capability, that the idea of the first time it could genuinely not be intentional, especially as these tools
Absolutely.
become significantly more embedded. But you told me I could use Grammarly. I had permission to use Grammarly, and now Grammarly Go is generative. How is that bad? That is the idea here, that I think that kind of transparency and reframing the conversation is going to be so important, because we can't expect that students actually know where that line is unless we actually talk about that line and provide time to understand both sides of it.
Mhm. And I also think about the students, and I would have been this, especially in high school. We have some students that are using it and maybe accidentally using it inappropriately without knowing. And then you also have students, if the conversation is just about AI is used for cheating, then they won't touch it at all because they have a lot of fear about getting in trouble, or they're more of the like type A achiever students where they want to make sure they're not doing anything to jeopardize their academic career. And so that it's actually a disservice for those students too, because per how we kicked off this webinar, we know that students need the AI literacy and the skill set to effectively use the technology and use it safely and ethically. So if there are some students that are like, look, I just don't want to get in trouble, so I'm not touching it for my entire high school career, then that's a disservice to them as well. Okay, shall we talk a little bit more about what are some ways to then integrate?
Yeah, let's do it. So let's get into now we're getting into the meat of like the application side. You know that we love to do some application tactical practical stuff. And so we wanted to just like here's our cool teacher that's talking about AI. Definitely generative AI generated. One of the things that we really want to kind of talk about is this idea that I think people when they hear us talking about AI literacy, they think
Mhm.
students at and 10-year-olds on laptops typing away into ChatGPT. That is not what we are suggesting, everybody. This the same way that we're asking for students to learn how to be balanced in their own AI approaches, we're suggesting that with you as well. These tools are very nascent, they are early, they are not reliable, and they can be harmful to young people. And so what we want to do though is we want to think of like there are two options here about if you learn about AI, like how are we going to learn with AI? One option with our younger students, and even at the beginning of the older students' journey, is modeling. Like modeling is so important to do. And so modeling, like we actually do a think aloud with adults, which is so funny. Yeah, like so Kate, like I'm up there and
Mhm.
I'm like, here, superintendents, like let's do a think aloud. And they're like, she's crazy. But then they watch what I do, and it actually it starts to build that practical knowledge of what's possible. Because what we're doing is we're expanding the knowledge of what's possible with technology. So modeling is a great way to start showing best practices and even starting to identify what when and when not to trust. And so I'll give you two
Mhm.
examples. I'll give you one, and then I'm gonna ask Corey to give you one, which but the one I'm going to give you is that there is a fifth grade teacher in Kentucky. I was on a webinar with him. So he was the teacher of the year. And he had a lot of trouble with his fifth graders. They had a sentence of the week. They were not very engaged. They kept turning in these like not very good sentences. If you're a fifth grade teacher, I think you can feel the pain from here. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to really start thinking about how to start building AI literacy and start adopting these tools. So what he did is he had a catch the bot game. And what happened is he would go to ChatGPT every week with the same sentence frame and say, write a sentence. And then the students had to submit their sentences and they had to be like, we're supposed to try to find the bot. And if they could find the bot, they lost because it was too easy. And so what ended up happening is the bot never spelled things wrong. It never had grammatical mistakes. It always met the needs of the prompt. And so what ended up happening over 6 weeks is the students started writing perfect sentences because they didn't want to get caught. And so
Mhm.
something like that was like he modeled how he did it, he showed it, he talked about how it can be done, and he used it kind of as a lever to build this idea of like starting to build like that literacy skill, but also like how AI can use, but also what it does and doesn't do. And so the kids were able to start doing that. And what's great is because it was just a sentence, like they were like pretty like fifth grade sentences. And so it was something that could be a really cool little tool and way to model. And then Corey, let me talk to you about how we started. We always ask our trainees to try out what are you ChatGPT, but we've started adding a
Oh,
second
yes.
prompt. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, sure. So in our trainings, we start with what are you, ChatGPT, and then I always like to ask, what is your knowledge cutoff date? One of the pieces of understanding the limitations is understanding that there are knowledge cutoffs for when the models are trained. And I encourage you all to try it out yourselves because guarantee, even if there are only 5 people in the room, ChatGPT is going to give us different answers. So it highlights for the audience very quickly, one, that ChatGPT does not give consistent answers. Two, it doesn't even know a very well-known fact about itself. And so it's not fact checking, and thus it's a hallucination. So depending upon the size of the group, some of them get the correct answer, October 2023, but others will get April 2023, some get September
2021.
2021, yeah, etc. And so that is a quick way that we model for the adults that we're working with about hallucinations, inconsistencies, and responses, even about on a very well-known fact. That's what
Absolutely. And
yeah.
yeah, it's just kind of one of those pieces where just showing people like we really press everyone to like not stop after the first prompt, like we do this, but we also like these are the ways to establish the need for like really critically evaluating outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I also just want to, before we go on, Susan has written about this idea of deficit mindsets around academic integrity to like more asset focus. And we totally
Mm-hmm.
agree with this. And this is why like we love this idea of the modeling aspect, because some of it is like we can model how we use it as adults and what we don't use it for and the mistakes we've made, because that also helps with students understanding like, okay, if that, but then this is the way it did work. So like I was going on a trip and I used AI to help me do this. Like, there is this crazy opportunity to start thinking about, oh, wait a second, I could plan the best birthday party for my parents, or I can connect with my grandmother who speaks a different language than I do, or like these ideas of the places that we can go with this that become more than just academics, but like part of our lives and part of our ability to like communicate and to collaborate and to build, which I think is really going to be an awesome opportunity going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we like to highlight, sometimes I know I do, Amanda, you do a great job of reminding me that people need to know this. We highlight age appropriate usage for these tools. And while we have some of the popular foundational models here, this also applies, we believe, to the application layers as well, as being aware of what we need to model and how to set students up for success in using them. There's a difference between what is legally allowed and what we believe is age and developmentally appropriate. And so we like to say modeling versus jumping directly to student use. One, because it builds AI literacy before students are independently using the tools. But two, because these tools actually are not yet okay and appropriate for the under 13 to use. And even with 13 to 17, it should be with parental consent. So this is important to know. We do not, well, that's a little aggressive, sorry, but we sometimes we hear about elementary schools are under the age of 13 and students using ChatGPT kind of solo, or diving into some of the other tools solo. And we think it is very important to know that it's not appropriate for that age level to be using it by themselves. That's why the modeling is so important.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to put a point on when Corey says application layer, what we mean is
Oh,
like
yes.
the applications like Magic School or DFIT or School AI are essentially applications on top of the models that run ChatGPT, Claude, also, we don't have it up here, but Llama, which is Meta AI, and then we have also Google Gemini.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
yeah, I realize we're missing Gemini.
But also Gemini at this stage is still 18 and over. But I think that this is where it gets really interesting because people genuinely don't realize that the tools themselves that run the models that you might be using with students also have their own age ranges. So terms of service is really important. So it's just something we just want to establish. When we start sharing like Chicago's guidance, it has this chart in it. This is the thing that people pull back on, and because I guess it just feels like it's so ubiquitous. It's so everyone's heard of ChatGPT that it would just be available to everyone. But it's still going to be something that even the systems themselves are indicating that it should not be used under 13. And even if it's used for those kind of teenage years, it should be with parental permission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna roll. We have just a little bit of time left.
Oh
So
gosh, yeah, we're running. I will. One thing I'll say too. I know this can't comes up in conversation with our team, and sometimes when we're talking to educators and leaders, there's a little bit of a we know that they're using it at home, or we know that they're using it already. Sure, there's only so much like locus of control, and maybe some of your elementary or under 13 students are using tools at home. That doesn't mean we just throw in the towel and let them have at it. We have control over what's happening in our classrooms and in our school buildings. And that is even more, it's my perspective, that's more of a reason why building this foundation of safe, ethical, and effective is important, because it gives students more tool sets to make the decisions about whether or not they should be engaging at home. And if they are choosing to do that, or their parents are letting them do that, how to do it in a way that is safe.
absolutely.
But what about the 13 plus? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Amanda.
So if you're actually thinking about, and I will say that we will say that these critical analyses pieces actually they can go up or down. You can actually have students do the analyses post having done it. So like they're not actively like prompting, but they could be looking at the evaluated pieces. So we're going to drop into the chat a critical evaluation activity. And we also have a prompt too that we can drop in the chat. Here are some ways in which you can actually have students start to like evaluate AI outputs. And so things like being able to compare a human generated output and an AI generated output, or comparing multiple AI generated outputs and looking for, hey, what makes this uniquely human, if anything? What are there common themes or common applications? Like, does it matter the quality of the prompt? Like, can we actually change the voice into ours? Like, is that possible? Are we going to be able to identify areas in which it's clear to like know when misinformation or hallucinations can happen? Can we double check the work and know what we should be asking and not? But the idea of actually starting to look into these tools and starting to evaluate, we talked about, like, Corey, you did such a good job of putting a pin on that idea of human centered, like that human centered component of like, AI can help you get a pretty average draft of something, but like if I did that, it actually is sometimes harder to make that draft your own in your own
Mhm.
voice than it is to just write it yourself, especially if you're not very good at prompting yet. So like that idea of like, I don't know if Corey was an English teacher. I remember I was a science teacher, but I remember our ninth grade, in New York City, the first thing that kids did was memoirs in English. And it was so hard to teach kids about voice and to have them crystallize what made them truly themselves. Like giving them the most generic output from an AI and asking them to figure out how to make it their own not only establishes that, hey, second, if you're just going to submit something that's AI generated, you're going to get caught. And I'm not
Absolutely.
it's going to be easy to see, but also like how do you make this original? How do you evaluate? How do you critically think about what's your voice? How do you critically think about how to make it your own? Because more and more our world is going to shift from a place in which we generate everything as humans, everything written, to something where we evaluate, we edit, we analyze, we make our own, we brainstorm, we start. Like that is going to be a really unique like place that we're going to dig a lot more into. So if you think about like editing, like becoming an editor of ChatGPT will be a job.
Mhm.
And so it's something that I think is really an awesome opportunity to do. And you can use this with younger students. With older students, you can have them actually do this prompting and then do the evaluation. But you can also do it in your staff rooms. If you're a nonprofit professional or an ed tech professional, this is a wonderful way to start building the AI literacy across your entire organization.
And what it continuously reminds us is that you have to have a certain level of expertise. You have to have that subject area expertise, or knowing, at least have a sense of what is the output that you're looking for. What does good look like? as part of effectively using the tools. So I know, and again, I don't want to undermine any of the fears or the concerns we might have about integrating AI into education, but I know one of them is like, oh, it's going to undermine student mastery of the content at hand. Well, as we all use it more, we continuously see you actually have to have very strong subject area mastery in order to use AI effectively. And we like critical analyses because students practice that subject area mastery and the topic at hand. And it also continuously stamps the ideas around AI literacy, that they are biased, you have to look for misinformation, and that you have to edit the outputs in order to use it effectively.
Absolutely. And so we would just say, like, I know that we had a question in the audience from Shannon. We just dropped a curriculum, our curriculum at 7 to 9 and 10 to 12. We are building out elementary versions. That's on Mandy's list. So we have that there. So the last thing we're going to kind of like wrap this up was one of the first things we ever wrote, everybody. This is actually the first version of this guide, Should I Use AI? It's almost, I think it's over a year old. This is something that we wrote because we were seeing it like how do we get teachers to wrap their heads around how we can have students use these tools effectively, but also teach them what responsible means. And so just talked about critical analysis, but this is how we can think about teaching students early and often about what the ethical use could look like, but also modeling. I know it's a vintage. It's our prompt, our rubric prompts, or we have 10 prompts we started with when it was just me. And
Vintage
this is
artifact.
probably two of the earliest things we ever did, everybody. Also, our intro hasn't changed very much as well. So those are going to be things we've done for a long time. But we've seen this be so effective in terms of, first of all, we love a decision tree as educators. Let's be honest. We love something that takes people through mindsets and steps. And so it's the idea that we are actually going to start to see that like students can talk about brainstorming and studying and explaining things or even refining their content. But then if it's a yes, these are the steps to take. Ask permission, choose the right tool, track your progress, and actually be transparent and think about verifying your outputs. If you're thinking about research, this is still something where hallucinations are rampant, even in tools like Perplexity that are connected, that are generative search connected to the internet. They still make mistakes. It'll still make up a statistic or a date. So are you using the right tools, and are you also using like secondary sources that are such a huge part of media literacy? And then the final piece is that if you're just having it do your work, that's not what we want. That'll never be acceptable. And so we have to think about how to reframe that. So do you need one, ChatGPT help a day, like, or for assignment? If so, let's talk about what it is. I want you to share what you did and cite it. And let's actually look at, did it help you? If not, let's talk about how we can do that better next time. And so we're reinforcing those AI literacy opportunities. So if we want to we're going to wrap because we're coming up on time. So let's just go to the last slide. Not that one, like the one before, yeah, this one. The reason why we spend so much time thinking about and talking about student AI literacy and AI literacy in general is that these changes will impact young people the most. It's just how it is. We are all part of the AI generation. All of our lives will be impacted by this transformational technology. But if you are a second grader, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, you're going into a world in 10 years that'll be radically transformed. And so the idea of building AI literacy into the ways in which we support our students is something that is not just necessary, but imperative. This is something we have to do. It's something that we need to do consistently and intentionally. And this is why things like National AI Literacy Day, which will be on March 28th, that we are supporting again this year, as well as some work that we're going to be doing more focused on kind of a global approach. Like there are going to be some really important pieces, but we hope today has been meaningful and supportive of what we've done. We've got more resources we will be able to share, but as always, you can hang out with us on, we have our LinkedIns, we've got our website and our webinars, but we just really appreciate you all for being here. And I hope that this really has spurred, because what we want you to do is you're going to be supporting these students. So we hope that this has been helpful to you all, and I hope you all have a great morning, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are, but just really appreciate your time today.
Thank you all for being with us.